Have you ever experienced panic while driving? It doesn't matter if you were driving or not. If you had to change your routine because of something that you're feeling physiologically, maybe that was having to pull over mid route, maybe having to avoid highways, maybe you feel like you have to avoid a certain person at work or avoid sugar or caffeine because of a fear of it sending you into a panic spiral. Maybe you just feel like you're not yourself these days. And whether it's behind the wheel or anywhere, you're in the right place. Because it's not just about the overwhelming anxiety while we're at work or while driving. Panic can strike in a number of places and it can make us feel out of control, evoke a lot of fear, and make us worried about our racing heart, worried about our jelly legs or inability to breathe. And even after the racing heart is settled and the rapid breathing has calmed down, sometimes it can have lasting effects about when it might happen again. So today we're going to take a look at the three-part system that is the anxiety release protocol: recognize, release, rewire. Because recognizing what's really going on physiologically, as well as the mistaken identity that we've assumed, is step one. Releasing these habits that we're perpetuating and the beliefs about ourselves that are not serving us is step two. And rewiring the brain with small little habit shifts so that we daily step into an identity of someone that is panic free and anxiety free is step three. Whether it's panic on the way to work or overwhelm while we're reading emails or feeling like we can't go into certain social situations out of fear, the real problem is these unseen codes that are hidden in the body. And it's there. These codes exist because of years of not living for ourselves. The way out is to lean into our own authenticity. So today we're focusing the most on recognizing, because recognition is the first step to reclaiming personal power. I'm going to talk about a case study, a previous client. Kim was a 50-something professional. We'll call her a lawyer. And she had driven the same route to work for over 15 years. And then one day something happened on a small little overpass. She was noticing her racing heart and she felt like her hands and toes were numb. And she got overtaken by this fear that she might go over the side. She worried that she might pass out. And this little incident became the start of a pattern. She started avoiding certain routes that had bridges. Then she started using conversations with people on the phone to distract herself and get through these little spots that caused her nervous system to go out of control. And so it may have felt like the nervous system was malfunctioning. Really, the nervous system was functioning really well, but her conscious mind had programmed in an unhelpful loop so that she started responding to misaligned habits because unspoken stress had been pushed down for too long. And then it became a quiet identity crisis. She just hadn't slowed down enough to face it. So let's get clear on what's really happening when panic strikes, because panic is a habit. Habits are energy saving loops, and they're governed by a place in the brain called the basal ganglia. Panic follows a very similar loop. There's a cue, something that happens in our environment. There's a routine that we perform in response to what's happening in our environment, as well as our internal environment. And then according to the routine that we practice, there's a reinforcement. So I'll give you an example. For example, getting onto an on-ramp on the highway is the cue that causes the routine of white knuckling the screen, starting to breathe shallowly, which causes the tunnel vision and the tingling. And the reinforcement happens when there's some sort of a habit like pulling off the road or avoiding that. It gives temporary relief, but the loop has now become locked in. So this is what we're recognizing, is that this is a simple habit pattern that's not helpful, that we think is giving us some temporary relief, like calling our spouse or getting out of a situation. We feel like we can't go on anymore. And so we remove ourselves from the situation. And so it's really locking that loop in, the unhelpful protection loop, whether that's avoidance or a safety behavior of some sort. But the reality is, panic is typically occurring in midlife as a response to an identity dissonance. It's mistaken identity. And it's why we have that adage of a midlife identity crisis. That word identity has kind of been lost, but it typically does mean it's a midlife crisis about our identity, about who we're becoming, about the expectations that we put on ourselves, about who we would be, could be, should have been at this point in our lives. And so when our current actions don't match the version of ourselves that we expected, or when the person that we're really wanting to be isn't aligned with our habits, with what we're doing, then that causes nervous system dysregulation at the identity level. And James Clear talks a lot about this, about how important it is that when we're changing our habits, changing who we are, we really align with a new version of ourselves. We choose to step into a new identity. And that has to do with not having a goal. A goal is great, but it's really about the systems. And so one of the quotes that he's really famous for from his book, Atomic Habits, is you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. I'm going to say it again. People do not rise to the level of their goals. Instead, they fall to the level of their systems, because somebody can have a goal all they want, but if they don't have the systems in place that are going to support that goal, you're not going to reach the goal. A goal can be written everywhere and said in the mirror, but we have to actually do the daily work to move into that new identity. So we don't become panic or anxiety free by wishing for it or just focusing on it. We have to choose to shift into the new person, into the new identity, by choosing who we're becoming the moment that we feel the anxiety rising. That moment when we feel those typical pangs of panic, we get to choose, because we can't outthink the panic. When we're going into a state of anxiety or panic, we're going out of the prefrontal cortex and into the limbic brain. And the limbic brain is all about automatic reactions. But we can choose to plan ahead and to have systems in place so that when we're recognizing what's happening, we choose to embody a brand new system and step into that new identity. So if you're already in the anxiety release protocol, you've got a lot of opportunities to have systems in place. And you'll be presented with, or have already seen, a lot of these questions, and you have worksheets to go along with all this. So if you're here with us live, you don't have to be scrambling to write these questions down. It's all included in the anxiety release protocol. But in case you're new and you want to try this on, you can choose to embody this new identity by creating a system for yourself. And you can begin by just asking yourself, what would a woman who no longer has panic attacks, whether that's driving or otherwise, choose as her first thought when starting her car, as her first thought when opening her laptop, as her first thought when starting the day? What would this person's identity be like? How would she choose to show up? What would she not tolerate in her inner voice? What would she not tolerate in her schedule? What would she not tolerate in her phone habits? Because as long as we can recognize the loop, then we can create a system to get out of the loop. And so there's a very simple way of just self inquiry. And you can ask yourself later on just to track what you're currently doing, because we have to know what's there in order to create a new system. And so if you're already in the anxiety release protocol, you've got a snap tracker, you've got the R&D diagram, but it's really great to be able to track what you're currently doing before overwhelm, during overwhelm, and after overwhelm, and asking, what am I making it mean? So if you're already a client, you've got all kinds of tools, but this is just about assessing which of these habits do not match who I want to be. Which of these habits are survival habits? The numbing, the avoiding, the controlling other people or situations. And which habits would belong to the future version of me? What are the habits that don't belong, that they actually belong to an older version of me that I'm stepping out of? This kind of awareness is where change begins. And we don't want to come at activities like this with shame, but just with gentle curiosity. Because with curiosity, there's no judgment. And we can bring clarity to the situation of what is that panic habit loop so that we can break it. And so there's 4 ways to break the loop. And this is adapted from James Clear's book. And the 4 ways are to make it invisible, to make it unattractive, to make it difficult, and to make it unsatisfying. I'll give you some examples. And this is his 4 ways to break a habit. But we're talking about breaking this panic loop. So you want to make it invisible by moving the triggering cue. I put a reel out 3 weeks ago about how I stopped listening to the news. I don't think I actually told when I stopped listening to the news over 8 years ago. I will get everything that I need from the Weather Channel. I know that they will tell me anything that's important, and I'll also hear it and see it on social media. But listening to the news is listening to the bad news. There's nothing good that they're putting forth. It's a lot of fear, and it keeps us hooked. So listening to the news at night is something that I tell my more advanced clients to really avoid, especially in the morning and at night, because we're programming ourselves with bad news. And so listening to the news while you're in the car, if you have panic while driving, is probably something you want to avoid. Listening to the news before getting in the car or before starting your workday is going to set your day off on a very different tone than listening to something empowering. So you can make it invisible by moving those triggering cues away from something that you already know is potentially stressful. You can make it unattractive by shifting the way that you view panic. Panic is a physiological response, and it's actually something that comes out of the 4 F's of stress. We talk about this extensively in the anxiety release protocol. But when we have these 4 F's symptoms, the panic occurs when we start spiraling about the symptoms. We get afraid of the fear. We're getting afraid of the physiology. And the physiology is just a signal. It's a message. It's data. It's not actual danger. It's the itty bitty shitty committee that starts spiraling and worrying about what's happening with the physiology and creating all these really what if dangerous scenarios. So we can make it unattractive just by shifting the way that you view panic. And so we're not viewing it as panic, we're viewing it as a signal and as data instead of danger. We can make it difficult by adding friction to the old pattern. And you do that by choosing in advance when you're not in a panicky state, when you're not in an anxiety induced state. You're choosing a new choice in advance. I know that when XYZ happens, when I'm feeling this rising in my chest or in my hands or in my feet or the tunnel vision, I'm going to make a new choice. We're adding friction to the old habit. That neurological pathway is very well worn, and we're carving a new way and making it difficult to do the old pattern. And then you can make it unsatisfying. And everybody who's in the anxiety release protocol knows that they've got a lot of accountability, and it will be very unsatisfying to have to report to everybody, I went down that old neural pathway. So if you add accountability with people that are safe, then you can make going down that habit loop very unsatisfying. So those are the four. You make it invisible, you make it unattractive, you make it difficult, and you make it unsatisfying. These are the four things that are very simple to use when you find that old habit loop starting up. So we're not actually suppressing what's happening. We're just noticing it and inserting new systems so that between the cue and the spiral, you have great power. You have a choice. Because you can't just get rid of old habits, you have to actually replace them. And so let's talk about the 4 laws of habit creation, again, adapted from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. And so this is about panic recovery, right? So we want to make our new habits really obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. You'll notice that those 4 things are the exact opposite of how to break a habit as to how to make a habit. We make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. So let me give you some examples. If you want to make it obvious, sticky notes on the steering wheel or on the laptop, belly breathing, choose relaxation, something like that, something that's really obvious to remind yourself. Make it attractive. So if you don't love doing the calming breath work, maybe do it while you're listening to your favorite relaxing song. Make it easy. So if it's too cumbersome to carry around your book and actually like make your tracker in there, keep a tracker on your phone, and then just at the end of the day, transfer it over to your book if it's too cumbersome to carry that around. Make yourself a little note on the phone just to make it easy and make it satisfying. Celebrate all the little wins, even the small wins. I stayed present through that entire drive. I chose to breathe when I got an email and noticed that I wasn't breathing. Celebrate, because this is how we make it into a routine. We notice that a cue has caused a craving to go into a certain routine. And this is what I love about James Clear's framework is most of the experts on habits, and I've been teaching about habits for years. Even before I was a coach, I used to teach about habits at yoga studios at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, to pre-wire us for, I don't make New Year's resolutions, but a lot of people do, and it can be helpful. So when we think about what we're actually doing, like there's a cue, and when we can notice that there's a craving, most of the other people, they talk about the cue, the routine, and the reward. And James Clear has that craving in there. He's like, there's a cue, and then there's a craving to do the routine, and then a reward, even if the reward isn't necessarily rewarding. It might be, going into a panic attack, but there's a craving to do the habitual thing. That's when we get to interrupt it. That's when we get to choose another way and return to ourselves to stop that downward spiral and learn to spin within. So if you're not already in the anxiety release protocol, you can try something like before you start your car, before you open your phone, you ask this one simple question. Is what I'm about to do and how I'm choosing to show up while doing it aligned with the version of me that I'm becoming? I'll say it again. Is what I'm about to do and how I'm choosing to show up while doing it aligned with the version of me that I'm becoming? This is a micro shift that can change your state instantaneously and especially over time. Because what we're doing is we're applying our conscious awareness to what is otherwise subconscious. And we're not trying to be perfect about it. It's just about interrupting the pattern. And the more we interrupt it, the larger that space between stimulus and response becomes. Because you're not here to be perfect. None of us are perfect. You're here to become powerful and to choose the power, choose powerful peace instead of the panic. Because if you are experiencing panic while driving or anytime, it's not a sign of weakness. It's just a message. It's just a signal telling you that something needs attention. So today we've gone over a little bit of the science, a little bit of the mistaken identity, the identity conflict, and the habit loops behind the panic. So now you get to start shifting, and you get to do this gently, sustainably, and intentionally. If you want more support, I have a free Facebook group where I go live from time to time. You'll find the link here in the comments in the notes. I also have a free masterclass that you're welcome to watch, but that may have already led you here. And so let today be your first step. Rewatch this video, write down some of the questions so that you can shift out of fear and into the driver's seat of your life. It's all about taking back control. I'll see you soon.